My name is Lena Hart. I am 35 years old, and 3 months ago, my mom handed the $5.2 million business I built from scratch over 12 years to my older sister, like it was a birthday gift. We were sitting at this nice Italian restaurant in downtown Denver when my mom slid a folder across the table, smiled, and said, "We've decided your sister will take over from here. It makes sense. She has kids. She needs stability." Before I could even process the words, my dad leaned forward, looked me straight in the eye, and added, "You'll work under her. She deserves it more. She has kids." I remember my fork hitting the plate a little too loud, the couple at the next table glancing over, my sister trying to hide a smirk. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just let out this short, disbelieving laugh, nodded like I was agreeing to some polite business deal, pushed my chair back, and walked out of that restaurant without touching the dessert I had ordered. 12 years of all-nighters, pitching clients, signing contracts, paying salaries, all boiled down to one night and one sentence: "You'll work under her." On paper, the company had always technically belonged to my mom because she had the banking connections and the credit score, and I trusted her when she said it was just paperwork. I thought my hard work was enough to protect me. I was wrong. For a while, they thought I would calm down and come crawling back to keep their empire alive under their new rules. Instead, I disappeared, took what I still had left, and started making moves they knew nothing about. 3 months after that dinner, it was my parents and my sister calling my phone, begging me to come back and fix the mess they had created. If you want to know how the business they stole from me nearly took them down with it, and how walking away turned into the best revenge I could ever imagine, stay with me until the end of the story. Growing up, I always knew I was the strong one in the family, which was just a nicer way of saying I was the one expected to figure things out on my own. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, the kind of place with track houses, cul-de-sacs, and kids riding their bikes until dinner, sprinklers ticking in the background every summer evening. My mom, Evelyn, worked at a bank, and my dad, Thomas, was a civil engineer who spent half his time on job sites and the other half tinkering with blueprints at the kitchen table. My older sister, Rachel, was the golden child from the very beginning. She was 5 years ahead of me, straight A's, student council, the kind of kid teachers would point to and say, "Why can't you be more like her?" When I was little, I honestly thought the sun rose a little brighter on Rachel's side of the house. If she forgot her lunch, Mom would drive it to school. If I forgot mine, Mom would say, "You'll survive. Just grab something from the cafeteria." Ifo. It started small, in ways you could excuse. Rachel got the new clothes, the new phone, the better bedroom. I got hand-me-downs and a pat on the back for being so low maintenance. When Rachel got older, moved to Chicago, and started climbing the corporate ladder in HR for a big company, the gap between us turned into a canyon. Mom flew out to help her move into her first nice apartment, spent a week setting up furniture and organizing closets. She wired money to help with Rachel's down payment on a condo, called it an investment in her stability. She paid for Rachel's MBA without blinking, talking about how it was for the grandkids' future. When I brought up college costs for myself, Mom just looked at me over a stack of bills and said, "You're resourceful, you'll figure it out," like it was a compliment and not a dismissal. So I did. I pieced together scholarships, took on part-time jobs, pulled long shifts at a coffee shop and a campus tech lab, doing homework on 15-minute breaks and pretending I wasn't exhausted. Then Rachel had her first pregnancy, and everything that was already tilted just slid further to her side. There were complications, scary ones, hospital stays, tests, late-night phone calls with doctors. I remember one weekend in particular. I was home from college, studying for finals, when Mom got a call that Rachel's blood pressure was spiking, Within an hour, she had thrown clothes into a suitcase, canceled everything on her schedule, and was on the first flight to Chicago. She didn't ask if I needed a ride back to campus, didn't check if I had groceries for the week. She just hugged me quickly at the door and said, "You'll be okay, right? Your sister needs me." After that, the dynamic in our family changed in a way that never shifted back. Rachel wasn't just the golden child anymore. She was the fragile one, the miracle mom who had been through so much. Any decision, any argument, any plan for the future got filtered through one question. But what about Rachel and the kids? It was like there was an invisible scale in our house, and anything involving Rachel automatically weighed more. When I won a regional design contest in college and got invited to this little award ceremony in Boulder, I was so proud. I printed the email, stuck it on the fridge, and begged my mom to come. She promised she'd be there, asked what she should wear, said she was proud of me. The morning of the event, she called from the airport, her voice already in that rushed, distracted tone. She had to fly to Chicago instead because Rachel had a big interview and was stressed about childcare, and Mom felt like she needed to be there. "We'll celebrate your thing later, honey," she said. "You know your sister has a lot on her plate." My dad showed up alone that night, clapping a little too loud when they called my name, telling me how proud he was, but even he shrugged and said, "You know how your mom is with your sister. She's been through a lot." That sentence became the excuse for everything. When Rachel got a promotion, Mom sent flowers, a handwritten card, and a gift card to a fancy restaurant in Chicago. When I landed my first freelance client designing social posts for a local gym, Mom said, "That's nice. But is it stable? Is it a real job?" She said it with this half smile that made it sound like a joke, but it never felt funny. When Rachel needed help with daycare tuition, Mom dug into her savings. When my laptop died right before finals and I asked if she could help me replace it, she sighed and said, "Can't your dad help with that? I've already stretched myself so thin for your sister." So my dad and I drove around town, found a used laptop on Craigslist, and he paid for it in cash while apologizing for not being able to do more. I learned early on not to expect my mom to show up for my milestones the way she did for Rachel's. If I invited her to something and she came, it felt like a surprise. If she didn't, it felt like confirmation of what I already knew. Out of pure self-preservation, I stopped asking. Instead of chasing her attention, I turned all that frustration into fuel. I started teaching myself design, social media, storytelling. I spent nights on YouTube tutorials and free online courses, building websites on that beat-up laptop while other people were out at parties. I took every odd job that let me practice. Flyers for school clubs, logos for local bands, Instagram posts for a friend's Etsy shop. I loved it, but under that love there was a dull ache that never really went away. The feeling that no matter how hard I worked, inside my own family I would always be the one who will be fine, compared to the one who almost didn't make it. Somewhere in there, I made a quiet promise to myself. If no one in my family was going to bet on me the way they bet on Rachel, I would bet on myself and build something so undeniable they couldn't ignore it. If Mom wasn't going to see my work as a real job, I'd build it into something bigger than any job she'd ever had. What I didn't realize back then was that the same mom who never fully believed my work was real would one day use that work as leverage, on paper and in court, to decide who in our family deserved it more. After college, when my friends were sending out resumes to big companies and refreshing their email every 5 minutes, I was sitting in a noisy co-working space in downtown Denver with a secondhand laptop, a thrift store backpack, and a stack of sticky notes, trying to come up with a name for the business I hadn't technically started yet. I wanted something that felt solid, like it could sit on the side of a glass building one day, not just on my Instagram bio or a Canva mockup. I ended up with Heartline Digital, a mix of my last name and this idea that stories are the lifeline of any brand. It sounded bigger than me, which was exactly the point. At first, Heartline was just me doing social media posts and scrappy branding projects for local coffee shops, yoga studios, and a couple of real estate agents who didn't understand Facebook but wanted something viral. I charged way too little, worked way too many hours, and said yes to everything because I was terrified that if I said no once, the work would dry up forever. I met clients in coffee shops, edited videos at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and answered emails from my phone while standing in line at the grocery store. When I tried to open a proper business account and apply for a small line of credit to smooth out cash flow, the bank looked at my age, my irregular freelancer income, and my thin credit history, and politely told me no. That's when my mom stepped in, all calm and confident in her bank manager voice. "Let me help you," she said one night over dinner. "I know how this works. We'll set it up so you can actually grow." She explained that if she formed the LLC in her name and used her credit history, we could get better terms, better banking, all the boring stuff I honestly didn't want to think about. She talked about liability, taxes, compliance, things I had only skimmed articles about. I just wanted to build cool campaigns and land clients. When she said, "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. You'll always be the one running things," I believed her. She printed out the documents, highlighted where I needed to sign, and I sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, signing and initialing like it was a formality. On paper, Heartline Digital belonged mostly to her. In reality, it was my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights keeping it alive. The first few years were rough. I lived in a tiny apartment with a roommate who left post-it notes on the fridge about buying more toilet paper. I ate a lot of cheap takeout, instant noodles, and whatever snacks I could grab between meetings. I took on ridiculous projects that barely paid anything just to keep the lights on and my software subscriptions active. I remember one winter where my heat went out for a week, and I worked in 3 layers of sweaters, blowing on my hands to keep them warm while I edited a video for a client who would later negotiate my invoice down because exposure. But slowly, things started to shift. A campaign I did for a local solar panel company performed way better than they expected. We told the story of regular families lowering their bills and helping the planet instead of just throwing technical specs in people's faces. The campaign got shared, their inquiries doubled, and they referred me to a friend at a clean energy startup. That startup referred me to another founder in Boulder. I realized there was this whole wave of climate tech and green companies that were brilliant at building technology, but terrible at talking about themselves. And I was good at turning complicated, boring tech into stories normal people actually cared about. So I leaned into that niche. I reworked my website to speak directly to impact-driven companies. I started going to conferences in Denver and Boulder, signed up for cheap exhibitor tables, and sat there with a basic banner and a laptop, talking to anyone who would stop long enough to listen. I spoke on tiny panels about storytelling for impact, networked at ugly hotel bars with founders in Patagonia vests, collected business cards, and followed up on LinkedIn like my life depended on it. Sometimes it did. Slowly, Heartline grew from me alone in a noisy co-working space to a small team sharing cheap office space in a renovated warehouse district just outside downtown. I hired my first employee, a copywriter who had been laid off from an agency and was thrilled to have a chance to build something new. Then I brought on a video editor who could make our ideas actually look as good as they sounded, and later, a strategist who knew paid ads better than I ever would, and loved spreadsheets in a way I never could. Every time I signed a new lease or a bigger contract, Mom would remind me, "Good thing I set everything up properly. Banks love seeing my name on those documents." She said it like a joke, like a flex, and I laughed along because I thought we were a team. I handled the clients, the creative, the management. She handled the paperwork and the taxes. My dad would swing by sometimes, hold up one of our campaign posters and say, "Look at you, building an empire." Then follow it up with, "One day you'll slow down and have a family of your own, right?" As if the business I was building didn't count as a family I was feeding. As the years passed, the projects got bigger. We weren't just designing logos and social posts anymore. We were running full-scale digital launches for startups about to announce funding rounds, building content strategies for companies expanding into new markets, producing video series that actually changed how people saw clean energy. I flew to San Francisco for client pitches, to Austin for a conference, to New York for a workshop. I'd walk into rooms full of guys in suits, set up my deck, and watch their skepticism turn into respect as soon as I started talking through the numbers and the creative. Inside Heartline, my role kept evolving. I was no longer just the one making things. I was leading strategy sessions, hiring department heads, sitting in on every major client meeting. Staff came to me when they were stuck, when they needed direction, when they wanted to celebrate a win. My mom wasn't in the office day to day. She'd stop by occasionally, say hi to people, ask about revenue and projections, then leave. But every time we needed a bigger credit line or wanted to negotiate better terms on something, her name and her credit history were what smoothed the way. She never let me forget that. "We're a good team," she'd say. "You're the vision. I'm the foundation." It felt good at the time. My dad liked to brag about us. He'd tell friends, "Lena and her mom built this thing together," even though she couldn't have explained a single campaign if you'd put a camera in her face. My sister watched from Chicago, half curious, half dismissive, making comments at holidays like, "Must be nice working online. I could never handle that instability," while also asking if I could take a quick look at her LinkedIn profile. After about 10 years, Heartline was pulling in over $3 million a year. We moved into a bright, glass-walled office in downtown Denver with our logo on the door, a real reception area, and a view of the city that made late nights a little easier to swallow. My team grew to around 30 people. We were working with startups across the country, signing clients from San Francisco, Austin, New York, sometimes hopping on calls with Europe early in the morning. We had health benefits, a 401k, Friday lunches when we hit big goals. For a lot of my employees, Heartline wasn't just a job. It was their career, their rent, their kids' health insurance. By year 12, we hit $5.2 million in annual revenue. I remember the night I saw that number on the end-of-year report. I sat alone in the office, lights low, the city glowing outside the windows, and I felt like I had finally done it. I had taken every ignored milestone, every "is that a real job?" comment, every time someone dismissed digital work as just posting online, and turned it into something no one could shrug off. Mom called to congratulate me, her voice warm and proud. "I always knew you'd make it big," she said. "And remember, the way we set things up is why you were able to scale this fast. It's a good thing you trusted me." I thanked her, because in my mind, she was right there with me on the winning side. I looked at the logo on the wall, the open plan desks, the photos from our last team retreat, and thought, this is mine. I built this. We built this. It never crossed my mind that the same signatures I'd scribbled at 22 would give her the power to decide, with a single meeting and a couple of documents, that my 12 years of work legally belonged to someone else. The year everything cracked didn't start with my business. It started with my parents. After decades of quiet resentments and louder arguments, my mom and dad finally decided to divorce. I wish I could say it shocked me, but honestly, by then the silence at family dinners was louder than any fight. What did surprise me was how fast things moved once lawyers got involved. There were papers, appraisals, negotiations about the house, the retirement accounts, the cars. Whenever Heartline came up, my mom's tone changed. She called it my business in front of her attorney, talked about the risk she took putting it under her name, about the support she'd provided me. My dad looked uncomfortable, but didn't push back. On paper, Heartline was hers, and he had always seen it as Lena's thing with her mom's help, not something he could or should fight for. When the dust settled, my dad got his share of the house sale and his retirement accounts. My mom kept Heartline Digital completely separate, as if it were some investment she'd made all on her own. I remember sitting in her kitchen one afternoon, stacks of manila folders on the table, when she casually said, "This business is what's going to make my retirement comfortable. You and I did this together." The together part stung, but I swallowed it. I told myself it didn't matter whose name was on the paperwork as long as I was the one actually running it. Then Victor appeared. He was a real estate developer from Phoenix, the kind of man who wore expensive watches and talked about opportunities in every other sentence. My mom met him at some financial conference and was engaged within a year. He started flying into Denver on weekends, talking about golf, markets, and how Denver was ripe for redevelopment. At first, I tried to be polite. I took them to brunch, listened to his stories about flipping entire apartment complexes, nodded when he asked if Heartline could maybe help with branding for my next luxury project. It didn't take long before their conversation shifted from wedding plans to asset strategy. One day, I stopped by my mom's house and caught part of a call on speakerphone. A banker's voice was talking about loan structures, collateral, and something about how having an established digital agency pledged alongside the real estate would strengthen the package. My mom hurried to turn it off when she saw me, smiling too wide as she changed the subject. That was the first time a cold little knot formed in my stomach. A few weeks later, Mom and Victor got married in a small ceremony in Phoenix. Rachel flew in with her husband and kids. My dad didn't go. I was there, standing in a dress I'd bought last minute, watching my mother promise forever to a man who already saw my business as a line item in his next deal. When we got back to Denver, Mom suggested a family dinner to talk about the future. She made a reservation at this Italian place downtown, white tablecloths, soft jazz, the kind of spot where people celebrate promotions and anniversaries. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. We sat there, me across from my parents, Rachel next to my mom, her phone face down on the table like it was killing her not to check it. We ordered, made small talk about the kids, about Denver real estate, about the Broncos. Then my mom pulled out a neat, thick folder and placed it between the wine glasses. "We've been doing some planning," she said. "Estate planning, succession planning. We need to make sure things are set up so everyone's taken care of." She talked about being in her 60s, about wanting to travel, about not wanting to work forever. For a second, my heart actually lifted. I thought she was finally going to say she was transferring the company to me, formally making me the owner of what I'd spent 12 years building. Instead, she turned to Rachel with that soft, proud look she'd always reserved for her and said, "We've decided Rachel will take over Heartline." She said it like an announcement at a baby shower. She has the MBA, the management background, and she has 3 kids to think about. This will give her family real security. My brain fizzed, static and disbelief. I looked from my mom to the folder to Rachel, who was trying and failing to hide a smile. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice too calm for how my chest felt. My mom launched into a rehearsed explanation. She and Victor had been meeting with lawyers and financial planners. They had restructured the company, shifted majority control, voting rights, and key signatory authority from her to Rachel. I could stay on as a high-level executive, of course. They pictured me as a COO or creative director, someone who did the work, while Rachel made big-picture decisions. My dad, who had been quiet up to that point, finally jumped in. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded like a man who had convinced himself this was rational. "Look, Lena," he said, leaning forward. "You're single, you're flexible, you'll be fine no matter what. Your sister has a whole family to support. You'll work under her. She deserves it. She has kids." There it was, the sentence that took my entire 20s and 30s and flattened them into a footnote next to my sister's motherhood. 12 years of risk, of stress, of payroll and lost sleep, weighed against the fact that Rachel had 3 children. I stared at them, at the documents sitting in that folder, at the people who were supposed to protect me, and realized they had used every bit of trust I'd ever given them to build a cage I was now expected to live in. Then, like I told you before, I laughed. A short, sharp sound that made my sister flinch and my mom's smile falter. I nodded, pushed my chair back, and stood up. "If that's how you want it," I said, "then you can run it without me." I walked out of that restaurant without touching my food, without asking to see a single page. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with texts from my mom, then my dad, then Rachel, all variations of "don't be dramatic" and "we can talk about this." I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. In that moment, I decided if they were going to treat my life's work like a retirement plan and a consolation prize for my sister, the most powerful thing I could do was walk away and make sure that, without me, their newfound security was anything but. Driving away from that restaurant, I let myself feel exactly one wave of rage. Then I shoved it into a box and started doing math in my head. I knew what was in my personal accounts, what my expenses were, what my runway looked like if I walked away for good. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I had a rough plan. I had about $450,000 saved between my salary, bonuses, and the tech stocks I'd been quietly investing in over the years. I had no kids, no mortgage, a beat-up car that was paid off, and a brain full of everything that actually made Heartline valuable. If they wanted the shell of the company so badly, they could keep it. I'd take the part that lived in my head and start over. The next morning, I walked into the office like it was any other day. I didn't tell my team what had happened at dinner. I just watched the people I'd hired and trained hustle to meet deadlines and answer client calls, while my sister sat in a conference room with my mom and her laptop open, looking at spreadsheets she barely understood. Around noon, I sent my resignation email. It was short, polite, and final. Effective immediately, I was stepping down from my role at Heartline Digital. I copied my mom and my dad on it and attached a separate file with everything my team would need to transition projects smoothly. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I just cut the cord they thought I'd never have the guts to touch. Then I went home, opened my own laptop, and started drafting the next chapter. Within a week, I had filed paperwork for a new company under my name alone, Bright North Studio. No hidden majority owner, no for convenience signatures. I hired a lawyer this time, a woman who specialized in small business and who looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're going to make sure no one can ever do to you what they just did." We set up the LLC properly, opened accounts that belonged only to the business, and mapped out a structure where any future partners would be exactly that. Partners, not secret puppet masters. I found a small office in a shared building in the Denver Tech Center. Nothing fancy, just a bright room with big windows and enough space for a handful of desks. The first week, it was just me and cheap furniture from IKEA, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the hum of someone else's startup down the hall. It should have felt like a downgrade after the glass-walled space Heartline had, but it didn't. It felt clean. It felt like mine. Then came the hard part. Telling clients the truth. Not the messy family version, not the part about betrayal and kids and estate planning, just the professional part. I called the clients I had personally brought into Heartline, the ones who had my cell number, the ones I'd stayed up past midnight for on launch days. On each call, I said some version of, "There's been a change in ownership and leadership at Heartline. I've chosen to start a new agency, Bright North, and I'd love to keep working with you if it makes sense." I never asked anyone to leave Heartline out of loyalty. I just laid out the reality. Who would be running their campaigns? Who would be making decisions? Who they trusted. 70% of them chose to follow me. Some did it quietly, waiting for contracts to end before switching. Others moved immediately, telling me flat out, "We didn't sign with your mom. We signed with you." Three of my strongest team members, our head of strategy, our senior video producer, and a performance marketer who basically spoke in data, handed in their notice at Heartline and joined me at Bright North within a month. We took pay cuts at first, made coffee in a thrift store machine, and used folding chairs until we could afford real ones, but the energy in that little office was electric. We were building something again, only this time without someone else's name sitting on top of it. About 2 months in, a friend of mine who ran a small online summit for founders asked if I'd be willing to share my story on a live session about boundaries and burnout. I hesitated. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to put out there. But then I realized I didn't have to expose my family to tell the truth. I talked about what it was like to build a company where the legal ownership didn't match the actual work, how I'd ignored the red flags because it was just paperwork, how I'd let loyalty override common sense. I never said Heartline's name. I never named my mom or my sister. I just told the story of walking away from a business I had technically never owned and starting over with everything I'd learned the hard way. Someone clipped that talk into a 10-minute highlight and posted it on YouTube and LinkedIn with the title, "She Built a 5.2 million business she didn't own." It took off. People in the comments tagged each other, saying things like, "Read your contracts," and "Never put your parents on the paperwork," and "This is my worst nightmare." A few founders reached out to me after watching it, saying they wanted to work with someone who understood both the power and the danger of building something from scratch. Those messages turned into discovery calls. Some of those calls turned into contracts. Bright North signed a national climate tech company because their CMO watched my talk on his lunch break and decided, anyone who survived that and still wants to help other businesses grow is someone I want on my side. While my parents were telling themselves I'd come crawling back to keep Heartline afloat, I was sitting in a tiny office in Denver, looking at the first real revenue reports for Bright North Studio, realizing that walking away from what they stole was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the kind of revenge that doesn't require shouting or drama, just success they could no longer claim as theirs. While Bright North was taking shape in that little office, Heartline was quietly starting to fall apart. At first, I only heard bits and pieces through former coworkers and industry gossip. A client would mention in passing that they'd gotten a strange email from Rachel about changing scopes and timelines. A designer who stayed behind would text me saying they'd been pulled into meetings where no one seemed to know what the actual strategy was. On paper, Rachel had the title. In reality, she had no idea how any of it worked. She started making changes just to prove she was in charge. She cut back on research and discovery calls because she thought they were too time-consuming. She asked junior staff to approve things they weren't qualified to touch. She moved deadlines forward to impress new prospects, then couldn't deliver. Campaigns that would have run smoothly a year earlier started slipping. Clients noticed. One longtime client called me one afternoon just to vent. "I know you're not there anymore," he said, "but something's off. The new leadership doesn't listen. They keep talking about efficiency and process, but they're missing the whole story. It feels hollow." I listened, said I was sorry he was dealing with that, and gently reminded him he had my number if he ever needed help. A few weeks later, he moved his account to Bright North. He wasn't the only one. At the same time, the thing I'd overheard months earlier about collateral and loans came back around. The real estate deal Victor had set up in Phoenix was more aggressive than my mom let on. He had leveraged everything he could: his properties, some of her retirement, and yes, Heartline Digital. When revenue dipped and clients started leaving, the numbers no longer looked so pretty on a bank's spreadsheet. 3 months after that dinner at the Italian restaurant, my phone lit up with my mom's name in the middle of a workday. I stared at it for a second, then answered. Her voice sounded tight, the way it did when she was trying not to panic. "Lena, we need to talk," she said. "Can you meet us?" "Who's us?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Your father, Rachel, me," she said. "Please, it's important." We met at this small cafe near the Denver Tech Center, the kind of place where people hide behind laptops and cappuccinos. I walked in, wearing jeans and a bright North hoodie, hair pulled back, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. They were already there, sitting at a corner table. My mom looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. My dad kept adjusting his glasses. Rachel's confidence had slipped. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. For a second, seeing them like that almost cracked something in me. Then Rachel opened her mouth. "You've put us in a really difficult position," she said, like I was a misbehaving employee. "Clients are leaving to go with you. Staff are following you. It's not fair." I held her stare and said, "They're adults. They chose where to go. I didn't force anybody." My mom jumped in, trying to smooth it over. "Regardless of how we got here," she said, "the reality is Heartline is struggling. The bank is breathing down our necks. We need you back, Lena. You know the clients. The team respects you. If you come back as COO, under Rachel, we can fix this. For the family." My dad nodded, leaning forward with that same logic he used at the restaurant. "Sometimes you have to put aside your pride for the greater good. Your sister has a family to support. You're still young. You'll work under her, but you'll still be important." I let them talk. I asked a few questions, not about their guilt or excuses, but about numbers, revenue, debt, the loan tied to Victor's development, the covenants they were in danger of breaking. The more they reluctantly shared, the clearer it became. Heartline wasn't just wobbling, it was sinking, and if I stepped onto that ship, I'd be dragged down with it. "You could buy it," Rachel blurted out at one point, desperation cutting through her tone. "Mom said we could transfer control back. If you just come in and fix it, maybe we can sell later for a good price. We all win." The idea should have felt satisfying. The girl who built a company she never owned, swooping in to buy it for pennies on the dollar. And for a second, I did consider it. I pictured taking back the logo I designed, the name I came up with, the office I'd decorated. But then I saw what else came with it. A mountain of debt tied to a real estate deal I'd never agreed to, a board made of people who had already proven they'd sacrifice me for convenience, and a family who still believed their needs outranked my autonomy. "No," I said finally, calm and clear. "I'm not coming back. I'm not working under Rachel. And I'm not buying a company that only started falling apart because you didn't think I was worth owning it in the first place." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We're your parents," she whispered. "This is your family." "You made a business decision," I replied. "These are the consequences." I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover my coffee, and walked out. 18 months later, Heartline Digital was gone. They sold it to a larger agency for a fraction of what it had once been worth. The buyer cared about a few client contracts and some equipment, not the story behind it. The proceeds barely covered the debts from Victor's failed project. My mom had to sell her house in Phoenix, move into a small apartment, and start over in her 60s. Victor quietly exited the picture when the money dried up. My dad picked up freelance consulting jobs to make ends meet. Rachel and her family lost the big suburban house they'd stretched to afford and moved into a cramped rental. She reached out to me once, asking if Bright North needed help with HR or coaching. I told her, politely but firmly, that we were fully staffed. The truth was, my team deserved better than bringing my family's dysfunction into the office. They made their choices. I made mine. And the gap between us, once just emotional, had finally become financial and professional too. 2 years after I walked out of that Italian restaurant, I stood in a different kind of room on a small stage at a tech conference in Austin, looking out at a sea of founders, marketers, and investors, and saw our new logo glowing behind me, Bright North Studio. We had 45 employees by then, clients across the country, and annual revenue just over $15 million. Someone introduced me as the woman who rebuilt everything from zero, and it hit me for the first time that they were right. I had rebuilt everything, just not in the way my family ever imagined. Back in Denver, our office was twice the size of the one Heartline used to have, with plants everywhere, messy whiteboards, and a wall covered in campaign prints we were actually proud of. My team wasn't just talented. They were loyal in a way money alone doesn't buy. They knew the story. They'd watched me draw hard lines around what we would and wouldn't tolerate, and it shaped the culture from the inside out. On the personal side, my life had filled in too. I was dating Eli, a software engineer I met at a climate tech event. He knew the whole messy family saga and never once suggested I just forgive and forget. He respected my boundaries, my time, my work. We were planning a trip to Europe, talking about future possibilities without tying my worth to any of them. I wasn't rushing to get married just to prove something to anyone. One afternoon, I ran into my mom at a grocery store back in Denver. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of all those choices had finally settled onto her shoulders. We made small talk near the produce section, the way strangers do. She apologized, quietly, in half sentences and looks more than words. For a moment, I felt that old urge to fix things, to make her feel better, to carry the guilt for everyone. Instead, I took a breath and let the moment be what it was, a reminder, not a reopening. A few weeks later, I dropped off an old laptop at her apartment, the same kind of model she'd bought me when I first started freelancing, the one I'd built my early portfolio on. I'd wiped it clean, left a note that simply said, "Thank you for the beginning. I'll handle the rest from here." It wasn't revenge. It was closure. What my parents and my sister went through wasn't some magical karma. It was the natural result of treating people like tools instead of partners, of using family as a shield for selfish decisions. My success wasn't payback. It was proof that walking away from people who refuse to see your worth is sometimes the only way to survive. The real lesson in all of this is simple and brutal at the same time. You can love your family and still say no. You can be grateful for what they gave you and still refuse to let them own your future. You can lose what you thought was everything and still come out with more than you started, because you finally understand that you are the real asset, not the company, not the name on the paper. So if you've ever felt pressured to shrink yourself for the sake of keeping the peace, if you've been told to accept less because someone else's needs are supposed to matter more, ask yourself this: what would happen if, just once, you chose yourself and walked toward the life you actually want instead?